Morning guys, it is Saturday again, and this morning I'm going to be talking about why I'm growing all of my beans up arches this year and why I won't be going back to my old ways. Having grown beans for years and years and years, I have used a whole different array of things to grow them up. I've mainly used bamboo teepees, that's the most simple way, and I will still be using that for peas, sweet peas, all of that sort of thing, because they are perfectly adequate. Things like this, just 8 bamboo canes in a circle tied at the top to form a teepee. These are perfectly adequate for things that are not too top heavy, like tall telephone peas, mange tout, cucamelons, things like that. But I also had an A-frame which just stretched over the bed like this. It just fitted into the corners of each of my raised beds and it folded up for winter storage. Which I was growing things like runner beans up because they're just that much more vigorous. I often found that on the teepees, by the middle of summer when they were fully laden, they were pulling them over. So I've used a combination of those sort of things. But then one afternoon about 3 years ago, I walked into Wilko's and in their bargain section, they had garden arches for £7 each. And I thought, brilliant. Initially, I was going to put it up over the entrance to the plot and grow a rose up it or something like that. But when I got them back, I decided they were going to be for my beans. And since then, I have bought a lot more arches and I just think there is no better way to grow beans. I don't buy them from Wilko anymore, I get them from Amazon. I'll stick the link underneath. So I will go through my tips and tricks and what I've learnt and how to get the most out of these really cheap arches at the end of the video. But first I'm just going to talk about whatever kind of arch you use, why I think it's the best way to go. The first reason is space saving. So on my allotment, you know, we've got raised beds, and we've got pathways between all of them, and that pathway is essentially wasted space. We have them because they're practical, and I wouldn't have it another way. We have had the allotment in different formats before where we took all the paths out the centre and we just had very long beds, but we went back to the raised bed situation because it just works better for us. But like I say, those paths are actually just wasted space, and having a teepee or a A-frame takes up a whole bed. The inside of the A-frame I did used to grow things up which enjoyed a bit of shade, so I grew spinach and lettuce in there, but harvesting is very difficult getting down inside that space when you've got beans all growing up the outside. And with the arches, I'm just taking up a very small amount of space on the end of each bed and it's going over the path, which essentially means all of that growing space for those beans is on the paths area, so no bed space taken up. And that is a massive plus for me. Talking of harvesting, this is probably the major point. The harvesting of the beans is so much easier. If you think of a teepee or an A-frame like this, your beans growing up the outside and it flowers, and then as the beans develop, they get heavier and heavier and they hang down on the inside of the teepee or the A-frame or whatever it is that you're growing the beans up. They're all on the inside, which makes spotting them and picking them just that bit more difficult. You've got to reach through, and often you've got to try and look in from the other side to see the beans. It's not such a big problem when you're growing purple beans or something that's really brightly coloured, but green French beans or runner beans, it can be really difficult to spot them. And it's also really important to keep picking beans. If you leave them, if you're forgetting about loads of them, if they're getting lost in the growth and you're not spotting them and they start to form their big beans, that can really hinder the plant's growth. So they will just stop producing. Like with sweet peas, if you think about growing sweet peas, you have to constantly pick those sweet pea flowers to make them produce more. If you leave a whole flush on there, they just completely stop flowering because the plants are out to reproduce. The seeds is their offspring, and once they start feeling comfortable that they've achieved their goal, they just stop producing. And that is the case with most of the bean family. So you really want to be vigilant with picking your beans, and having them on an arch, that is just made so much easier because as the beans become heavier and heavier and they hang down, rather than having to reach through your teepee or your structure, They're just above you in an easily visible canopy, and everything is easy to see, easy to pick, and it's just a revelation. It's also a plus point for drying beans. So if you're growing something like Bolotis or Greek Gigantes, where you're not actually having to pick them as they become ripe, you're leaving those pods on those plants to dry out over the rest of the end of the summer, and then you pick them when they're dry. I've had problems previously in teepee setups where I've had to cut the leaves away from around the drying pods because they're holding moisture and the pods are going mouldy before they've dried out. Under the arch, they've got perfect airflow, there's no need to cut back foliage, and they dry out so much better. So yeah, for picking and for drying, it's just a better setup. Something that you do need to consider, if you're going for really fancy, really super solid arches that you can just move around your plot, it's not so much of a problem. But for these arches, my personal piece of advice is once you've got them in, don't move them. The only time you're going to be moving them is when they're coming out and you're going to be trying to use them for something else. Because they are not the strongest creatures on the planet, the more you can bolster them, the better. So giving them a bit of extra support really helps. But if they do rot off at the bottom, which eventually they are going to, they're only cheap chaps, the top arch is going to stay really solid because it's not in contact with the soil, and I've used them before, just the top halves, to cover beds, so they don't go to waste. But what it does mean is once you've got them in place, you're going to need to grow your beans or whatever it is you're growing up there in the same spot every year. I talked about this in last week's vlog about crop rotation, and if you're growing a particular crop in the same place every year, you just have to be really conscious of your soil's health, because you don't have that added advantage of moving the crops around to pick up different micronutrients from the soil. So just have to be on it with the soil health in the area that you're growing your beans. And the last point is, I just think they look great. Beans on the whole are a really very attractive plant. They've got beautiful flowers. There's a huge array of different flower colours, from kind of pale primrose pastels to fluorescent like classic runner bean orange, which are amazing. And then some of the purple runner beans have got very, very pale pink and purple flowers, and they're just beautiful. All pea flowers, obviously it's the same flower family, and they're just magnificent. And over the arches, you can't beat that. It's just gorgeous. And like I said, where the beans hang down on the inside, the flowers go on the outside before the weight of the beans pulls them down inside. So you just have a beautiful arch of flowers. Productive, beautiful, and inexpensive. Like I say, those ones were really super cheap. And actually, although I haven't bought any more £7 ones, all the rest of the ones I bought were like the minute upgrade from that. They're £10 each, and I'll put the link underneath because I think they are unbeatable. They are wobbly. I'm going to give you that straight out there. They are not perfect arches and they are wobbly. But the way I've got around that on my plot is I've put 2 in each section, tied them together with bamboo canes, and put a bit of, well, in my case it's bits of the old polytunnel or a stake in, just to give them a bit more stability. One tip I would say is when you are pushing them into the ground, don't put your foot right in the centre of the bar and push down, go side to side. Otherwise this can happen. This was my first ever arch and I made that mistake. So how I link the 2 arches together is I put them into the bed, they're positioned, and then they are about 20 centimetres apart. I then join both sides of the arch with a bamboo cane and either string or cable ties. Just trim the bamboo canes, and then you've got a double strength arch. This also helps to keep them in shape so they're not too wonky. But for £10 with a double, that's £20 per arch. I don't think you can beat them. If you've got the money to invest in sort of solid metal, beautiful garden arches, I'm totally up for that, go for it. But in an allotmenting environment, we're doing things on a budget, and a little bit wibbly wobbly isn't the end of the world. It's not the Palace of Versailles, it's just something to grow the beans up. Right guys, I hope you found that interesting. I've got the links to the arches underneath. There are so many different types you can get. This is the ones that I've found. I've got about 4 different types I've tried. These are the latest ones I've bought and they were really solid. I thought they were pretty good in comparison. do be aware that they are wobbly. Nobody's going to be doing pull-ups on these, I can tell you, but they're perfectly adequate for beans. I do recommend doing them in doubles, or at least bolstering them, because they're wobbly. But yeah, I just think I won't be going back. I think they are an absolute revelation for me. So anyway, that's sort of it from me today, guys. My Jiffy pellets have just arrived in the post, so I'm going to go and do some more sewing of my February sewings. If you haven't watched what can be sewn in February, I'll stick it above my head now. I did that one last Saturday. That's what I'm going to do this afternoon. So have a think about the arches. I think they're well worth it. And I will see you on Tuesday.